Welcome to the Rethink Leadership podcast, available on all platforms including YouTube if you prefer to watch. My name is Jeremy Blaine, CEO of Performance Works International, Executive Director of the Transformational Leadership Acceleration Institute, and Managing Partner of Diversity Talent. My aim is to bring insights from leaders, experts, and highly talented professionals from around the world. Insights, stories, and advice from the front lines of modern leadership to engage, inspire, and mobilize progress back in the workplace. Every episode is a learning opportunity for us all. The Rethink Leadership podcast also supports charities around the world. Each episode is in aid of a cause chosen by my guests, and to date, I'm proud to say we've supported over 60 global and local great causes. My guest today is Iliana Oris Valiente, an accomplished corporate executive, innovation and emerging tech pioneer, startup investor, respected board member, published author, and sought-after global speaker. With a clear vision and unwavering determination, she is a thought leader on a mission to build a future humans want to live in. She's currently the Managing Director and Innovation Leader at Accenture Canada, working with senior executives and boards to support their strategic transformation journeys. She leads multi-disciplinary teams across design, data and technology, focusing on emergent areas such as the metaverse, blockchain, Web3, sustainability, AI and cross-industry initiatives. Iliana is a champion of diversity, equity and inclusion and is a pioneering leader trailblazing the way for young girls, underrepresented communities and the rest of us. We discuss Iliana's incredible career and passions and uncover her new potted plant theory, a human-centered ecology to bind our human endeavour together in our communities and across enterprise. In fact, halfway through our podcast, we have cut in a further update on this since we recorded to bring the potted plant theory and practice to the fore. Let's hear more. Hi, Iliana. Thanks very much for joining me. Please tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey to leadership, and your fascinating role at Accenture right now.
Hi, Jeremy. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's such a pleasure. I'm definitely a multi-hyphenate. It's what I'm often referred to. I wear a couple of hats. I'm primarily a corporate executive. In my day job, I'm the managing director and head of innovation and ESG at Accenture in Canada. Accenture is a massive global consulting firm. We have 750,000 employees globally. When I'm not doing that, I happen to sit on a couple of boards of directors, including one of the largest hospitals in Canada, Sunnybrook, as well as on the board of CPA Ontario, representing well over 100,000 chartered accountants in the province, thinking about the future of the profession. And I spend a lot of my time thinking, writing as a public speaker on stages around the world and pursuing various entrepreneurial type of projects and building communities. That's probably the easiest way to distill who I am in a nutshell.
Wow, so no wonder we took some time in scheduling this. I was like, how do you find time for anything else?
I find time for things that are really interesting, and I've been told that my story helps people piece together different parts of their lives and that I should share it more often. And so I try to make room.
Well, I'm very grateful that you've made room, and we're going into a lot of discussion today around the workplace, around gender diversity and equality particularly. And we know that businesses have made a little bit of progress, but we're far from being where we want to be or where we need to be around that. And particularly across when we look at other diversity lenses, such as the cross-generational mix, and especially in technology, when we consider not just gender, but underrepresented and untapped talent pools and communities. And yet you've been a leader in professional services and tech for some time. And I'd really like you to take us through those experiences, if you could. The good, the bad, and the ugly, in your whole journey into that business, in being the youngest MD in Accenture, which is hugely impressive. And you're known for pushing those boundaries. So tell us a little bit about that and some of those role models that may have helped you along the way.
Mm-hmm. So I've had a very non-traditional career journey, to say the least. I started my career thinking I was going to work for the United Nations in an international development and globalization type program before I realized that I wasn't going to be able to make the systemic level changes that I was really driven by once I learned more of what was involved in that world. So I ended up doing a pivot and pivoted into more of the business side of things, pursued a degree in finance and accounting, became a chartered accountant, and really started my career working in tax, cross-border, high net worth individuals. I made a move into audit because tax was too backwards looking, no client interaction. Audit was still backwards looking, but at least I got a chance to interact with clients day in, day out, and meet with a lot of chief financial officers and ask the questions of what was keeping them up at night and really thinking through more of the strategy side of things. And that prompted me to make a move into the corporate finance world, which was actually forward looking. And that's when I stumbled into the tech space. I had a number of clients in that domain, and I realized this is where the world is going. It's dynamic. The products and services are ever shifting, and tech is going to permeate every single aspect of our lives. Within the tech world, I stumbled into the domain of crypto and blockchain. And because of my audit training, I was always thinking in terms of ledgers and reporting and what did this business do this year? What did this business do this year? And where are the reconciliation points? And for me, it was as though this light bulb went off of, wait a second, if we have a distributed ledger and suddenly multiple transaction points are recorded there, what's the future of audit? What's the future of accounting? Shouldn't we be paying attention to this? And that rabbit hole fascination led me to eventually building the first ever blockchain consulting practice in the world. I was at Deloitte at the time, and people thought I was crazy. People thought I was completely out of my mind. So when you talk about, being a boundary pusher, that was one of those very marquee career instances where I took a few gambles and it ended up paying off quite well. And so in that instance, what worked for me was understanding the world I was looking at disrupting and understanding this new emerging tech wave. And it was at that cross section that I found I was able to speak to all of the different stakeholders in language that they understood. And I think that's absolutely crucial when you are trying to get people to embrace change, because change is hard, change is scary, change is not something that we as humans necessarily want to embrace. And because I was able to take that posture and do something very non-traditional, I had a whole host of organizations trying to bring me on board to leverage that niche expertise that I had built. And so long story short, that's how I ended up originally at Accenture as the youngest ever MD, because they brought me on to say, listen, we are looking to accelerate our involvement in this industry. You have the brand, you have the network, you have the connections, you have the ability to explain these complex things in language that makes sense. And so I became the global MD responsible for blockchain innovation as part of our emerging tech group. And fast forward, after having done that for a bit and traveling the world, sometimes in 2 countries in a week, which I loved that diverse perspective, I was tapped on the shoulder to effectively take on the role that I have now, which is the head of everything innovation related in Canada. And then eventually I ended up adding ESG into the portfolio of things that I'm responsible for. So that's a little bit about the journey. And you had asked the question about role models, right? Okay, so role models is an interesting topic because on the one hand, I had the anti-role models. And then on the other hand, I had the people that gave me really important nudges throughout my career. Which of those do you want to talk about first, Jeremy?
Well, I like them both. I like the way that you talk about those anti-role models, because we've all had them, but those nudges along the way are equally important. So why don't we talk about both of them?
All right, sounds good. I'll talk about the folks that gave me nudges along the way, because for those listening in who are in leadership positions, You never know when a conversation that you have with somebody on your team is going to be career or life defining. There is one mentor I sat down with for a lunch, and partway through lunch, he puts down his fork and knife. He looks at me and he tilts his head and he says, "So, Iliana, when are you leaving us?" My eyes open wide. uh, am I getting fired? Is that what's happening? And he laughs and he says, no, 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 I can't fire you. You're my top performer. But I can't help but think that you are meant for bigger and better things. I'm sorry to say it, but you're just not an auditor. By training, by your DNA, you need to be doing something that's much bigger, much more exciting. And honestly, I'd never thought of it that way before. And it wasn't until he called me on it that I went home and I thought about it, and it stuck with me for years and years and years, and it marinated in my brain. And today, of course, I'm involved with the CPA Ontario board, but the role I play isn't as a day to day auditor or day to day finance person. It's really thinking about the future of the profession. And in a lot of ways, that mentor of mine was so right. And I'm glad he took the time out of his day to say what was on his mind. Otherwise, my career may look entirely different today.
And so, what about when the shoe is on the other foot, Iliana, where you're looking at behaviors and practices at leadership levels or people who are supposed to be role models, and you're saying, I don't want to be like that, and I won't be like that?
Mhm. I think the most important story that jumps out in my anti role model list is really around lifestyle. I remember being early on in my career and looking up to a senior partner who was so incredibly smart, incredibly well respected. And at one point we got into the conversation of age, and I guessed how old he was, and I was off by about 15 years. Partly because his partner had prioritized work so much at the expense of health, at the expense of hobbies, at the expense of personal relationships. And I remember looking at this and saying, I want to work. I have zero qualms with rolling up my sleeves, but at the end of the day, we are human beings. We're not human doings. And we need to be mindful of that. And it got me thinking that throughout my career, I will always have people that look at me, not just as a leader from a content standpoint, but as a leader from a lifestyle standpoint. And if I don't have people who say, I want her life holistically, not just her title, then I think I've partly failed in my role as a role model and as a leader. So, once again, for your audience, be mindful. And if you're not happy day in and day out, the people that you work with, they'll see it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I like the way you put that. We're human beings, not human doings. Quite right, because we can fit into that and slip into that very easily. Actually, you're also right earlier on in that, and something I talk about is that technology is everywhere and unavoidable in our lives, in works, and the lens that we look at careers these days, when we might have said it's business and it's tech over here, it's like the two are blending together. And you're one of a rare breed of incredible female leaders who are leaders in tech as well. And as a shame as it is that we still have a long way to go, and we still need to attract young girls and women into modern business and technology careers, because of course it's all going to be there. So I'm very sure there are those that will be listening to this, those that will send this to, will see you as a role model and be motivated by a leader like you, no matter how young they are, actually, or for that matter, no matter how old they are. So, what insights can you share with these young girls and young women who are listening to this, saying, "I want to be like Iliana. She really is blazing the trail."
Mhm. The biggest piece of advice I would give to anyone in their career early on is to lean into your strengths. And oftentimes, you won't even recognize your strengths on your own. You'll need to ask the people that are closest to you, and the things that come easily to you that you'll probably end up taking for granted, marry that up with an area of interest or passion that you have. And it's at those intersections that you will end up having the most success. In my case, it was the ability to explain things, communicate with multiple audiences, but also be able to understand really complex topics and figure out the so what, and then connect people to each other and connect ideas to one another. I've been able to stitch that together, and that's at the core of what I do today across all of the different roles that I have that on paper are very disparate and disjointed.
So when it boils down to it, ultimately in this technology digital fueled age, it's that human touch, it's those human touches which make the difference. It's the connection, the communication, the collaboration, bringing people together. It's something that I buy into wholeheartedly, and it's something that we would say to young people, no matter who they are, young people, untapped talent pools. We would talk about this need to work, let's say, adopt digitalization, work in digital ways, enable things with technology, but the human touch remains more important than ever. And those things, as long as you get it right. Would you agree with that?
I would. Tech has a marketing problem. And the marketing problem is that there's this perception that the only way to be successful in tech is to be a hands on keyboard software developer. I come from a family of engineers. I was actually supposed to be an engineer. I made the very last minute decision right before going to college, even though I was ready to go into an engineering program, to not do that because, I think I have other skills that wouldn't be well used in that profession. And now I run teams of engineers. And now we have the no code movement, the low code movement. And what are some of the professions that are most impacted by the rise of AI? Coding. In the future, you are not going to actually have to write a single line of code because you will talk to your computer and you will describe what you're looking to do, and the tech will be there as a co-pilot. So suddenly that opens up so much opportunity for people to come into the technology industry. And the reality is we need all of these voices building tech products because tech is used by everyone, regardless of your age, your gender, where in the world you live. And you need those multiple people building products that will resonate with the ultimate user base.
Yeah, and you're right about that marketing or perception problem. And when we interview kids around this, whether they're boys or girls, actually at school age, I'm talking around, and they're thinking about careers, there is a perception problem. It's like, I don't want to be stuck behind a computer, kind of pressing keys. It's all about coding, isn't it? And it's just not, and it's so exciting with what's coming down the pipeline when you consider, as you talked about, no code, low code platforms, and how you can name your co-pilot and it can work with you and all of these kind of things. And we're seeing the starts of that now for sure. um I just want to change tack a little bit, because this leads also that when you've got a grasp of all of that, of course, it leads to innovation at all levels. If everybody can be equipped with this, now you're managing director and your innovation lead, as you told us at Accenture, you're directing teams across design, data, all emerging technologies. You're trying to do that where you're cultivating a future, thinking about all of those technological trends, but also thinking about societal needs and trends. So, with a focus on future of work, but also how we live and how we need to be more human centered, exactly as you said before. We are humans, we have lives. It sounds fascinating. So, can you tell us a little bit more about that and why it's so important and how you're going about doing it?
Mm-hmm. My motto and my North Star is that I want to be involved in building a world and a future that humans actually want to live in. And I feel very strongly that we are the architects of our future. We write our own story. The future doesn't just happen, and it doesn't just happen to us. We can be very active participants in that. And so in my day to day work, I am very conscious of looking at emerging technology trends, emerging social trends, and figuring out, well, what do I want to do? with those to help build that ideal future state. And I'm in a very privileged position given that in my network, I have access to a lot of the senior most executives from all of the Fortune 500 companies, as well as all of my contacts that are in more of the emerging startup-y type landscapes and the VCs, and the ability to say, hey, here is a trend coming up. What do we want to do about it? How do we combine forces for the general greater good? It's a really magical formula. And so I've been fortunate enough to lead cross-industry, multiple stakeholder programs that support ESG objectives. And I can tell you, we can be far more effective that way than you can when you're a tiny nonprofit or when you're a government that has all of the constraints of what you can and cannot do. And then from a tech standpoint, I'm very involved now on the AI side of things. I'm actually in the process of building out, and this sounds really funny to say out loud, an AI powered digital human twin of myself is being built. Her name is Lila, and she's being trained on everything I've ever written, everything I've ever said on a stage. I've recorded 6+ hours of podcast type recordings of me reading scripts so she can learn my cheerful voice, my neutral voice, my sad voice, so I can use her as an extension of myself. So I'm spending a lot of time on that AI side of things and thinking through the human aspect, the tech aspect, how we're going to coexist, and what this means for the future of work if we're no longer needing to do all of the grunt work ourselves, and we can free up the time of humans to do the creative work, or to frankly even have more leisure time, which I think was one of the premises of the Industrial Revolution. But somehow, instead of us getting more time, we ended up in hustle culture and burnout culture and working even more than we had ever expected. And then I'm spending a lot of time on the metaverse side of things as well, thinking through the physical world, the digital world, and the blurred lines in between, and how do we use that not to completely live in a virtual world. I don't think that's the future I want to collaborate in, but how do you use that to reduce unnecessary travel, unless you're traveling for fun and you're really enjoying it, and to drive those efficiencies and to, once again, give humans back more time to spend in a way that they may decide to.
Yeah, not for the first time doing these podcasts, I have to say, Iliana, I'm feeling like I've achieved nothing in my life. When I hear what you do, is absolutely fascinating, and I am a little bit behind on that AI. I'm still using characters and prompts to try and actually create something that can create things like me, but not kind of the digital twin aspect that can be me, if you like, that be that digital human in the space. So I really get what you're talking
Yeah.
about there.
There will always be the real Jeremy.
There will always be the real Jeremy, but I'm very interested in the experiment that you're doing here, and then creating the human digital twin of Jeremy at some point. There's as I was ticking off some content pieces that I've got as you were talking there. So great learning for me, as these podcasts always are, and it is fascinating because of what that unlocks, what it can do, how it can help you get that balance as well, as long as everybody accepts that's the way that we're going to work. And that's kind of a big mindset shift as much as anything else. And that links, I guess, to how then we would make that an all level or all employee play eventually as we move it down the road. And I'm really happy to hear that you practice what you preach. You champion that idea of leaders as role models of the organizations in customizing the employee experience. So not necessarily this kind of hustle culture, as you said, and working all hours, but actually finding uniqueness and ways of doing things which are more effective, that people can see and say, I could do that. So why is it important for more leaders that may be tuning into this to really start thinking about that in terms of workforce transformation and how it could benefit their people and their organizations and ultimately themselves?
Mm-hmm. The best way to think about the workforce transformation is that we are living in the 21st century, but operating with tools from the 19th and 20th century. Meanwhile, the nature of work has fundamentally shifted, and it will continue to shift. We are seeing mass automation already as companies are searching for efficiencies in their business, and that puts a major onus on employers to be thinking about training and reskilling. 50% of people are going to require new skills training by 2025. We're currently at the end of 2023. Most organizations are not equipped to fully jump in and manage that responsibility, because that responsibility cannot fall entirely on the shoulders of governments. And we need to equip people with those new skills. And this is where a lot of the advancements in technology are going to be hugely helpful. And as people shift into more creative, innovative type roles, we are going to realize that the other old school management philosophy of you just treat everyone with a broad brush no longer makes sense, because it's not factory employee A versus factory employee B versus factory employee C. You're now dealing with unique, whole individuals, and no person is the same as another. Some of my teams will joke that I'm known for using an expression in the workplace that all of our people are essentially snowflakes. They're all different from one another. And my number one strength in Clifton Strengths Finder is individualization, followed by being a relator. So it's not a surprise that I treat each person on my teams as the unique snowflake that they are. And as a leader, a skill that is going to become more and more prevalent in the future is understanding the people who work with you and for you, and knowing what motivates them, what scares them, what their requirements are, and how can they thrive in the environment that you're creating. And I feel so passionately about this that I've actually been creating a new leadership theory that I'm calling the potted plant theory, to help individuals, but also organizations, think about how they create that ecology where everyone can thrive.
Since recording this podcast, Iliana has made a lot of progress on her potted plant theory, so this is a brief interlude to bring you up to date.
The potted plant theory suggests that humans exist on a spectrum aligned to a human-plant archetype. Much like in nature, you have in a forest a whole host of species that coexist even though they have unique needs. The same can be said of humans. And so the archetypes range on a spectrum from sequoia trees all the way through to air plants. When you imagine a sequoia tree, you imagine a giant, beautiful, majestic tree with extensive roots. But if you wanted to transplant it, you couldn't. They're too big, it's impractical. You move along the spectrum and you find a slightly smaller tree, like a red maple. And you can actually move a red maple once, twice, maybe 3 times in its life with the help of an arborist, a tree specialist. And if all the right conditions are in place, that tree can learn to thrive in its new environment. Further along the spectrum, you end up in potted plant territory. Potted plants have their roots attached to them, so you can move them room to room, city to city, country to country, and they don't really skip a beat. And then finally, you have air plants. You've probably seen them if you've walked into a plant shop and they're hanging from the ceiling in a little glass jar, very small roots, and they don't need a whole lot of water or soil or fertilizer. In fact, too much is overwhelming for them. When you think about humans and how they align to these archetypes, if you look at the air plant example, it might correlate with the creative, artsy, whimsical types of individuals, but it's not constrained to just a stereotypical image of the 22-year-old in Bali in a hammock working on their computer as a freelance graphic designer, because you could actually be a doctor that is doing virtual care and is able to work remotely and travel internationally. And you compare and contrast that to an individual that's more aligned to a sequoia archetype that really appreciates the stability, the groundedness that comes from the routine, and that's ultimately what they need to thrive. So an individual's placement on the spectrum is usually determined across one of 2 variables. One of the variables is their need for certainty versus their need for novelty, and the other variable is their need for resources. low amount of resources or high amount of resources in order for them to feel secure, established, and to thrive. So it's fascinating for individuals to better understand themselves, better understand and relate to those around them. And it's also relevant in the workplace for employers to better understand their teammates and what kind of conditions, benefits, and perks that might appeal most to those demographics. So that's a little bit about the theory. Hope this is helpful.
Thank you for that, Iliana. Now back to the podcast, the potted plant ecology of Iliana. So we'll be looking out for that in your book whenever that comes out. I'm sure that's there. And you're so right. Being in the space of leadership transformation, but also sort of learning and workforce transformation, it doesn't surprise me at all about the skills need within the next couple of years and that reskilling need. And the speed of learning that we need and how we need to treat people individually and come away from something else you said before around the 20th century way of doing things and really think about the now. That unique whole individual needs unique whole learning paths and learning journeys. It's interesting you use the word snowflake, because I've heard the word snowflake, but more as a negative connotation when being referred to as Gen Z. So you've turned around that to be somewhat more positive, to think actually we're unique and we're unique, we're special, we need to be treated like that. How do you balance those two kind of perceptions of the same thing?
I actually think that there's a lot that we can learn from different generations in the workplace. And it's not like one generation is better or worse than the other, but they have fundamentally different requirements and things that they are prioritizing. And one of the things I've been so delighted to see, honestly, from the Gen Z folks on our teams is they question norms. They don't just assume that the way we've always done things is the way that things should always be done. Like, well, but why? And does that actually make sense? Does that make my life better? Does that make anyone else's life better? And just the circumstances which they were born into, I think there's a lot we can learn. I've actually been leaning on a lot of my Gen Z employees to help me with a couple of strategic projects because I have blind spots, even though I'm in my 30s. We all have blind spots, and I think we can do more of that reverse mentorship. But when you think about, if I go back for a moment, the whole potted plant theory and this idea that people can exist on a spectrum and they have different needs, the need for certainty versus the need for novelty, how many resources they need in order to feel settled and secure and to thrive, low resource needs or high resource needs, depending on where you are generationally, that also is going to change your perception of things.
Yeah, and that does lead me then to another question. If we bring together what we've talked about so far and then go back to the more or less emerging technologies of artificial intelligence or deeper machine learning, if you like, how will that rise impact what we're talking about here, Liana, for the better, or if we get it wrong, for the worse? Particularly when I reflect back on what you said, what you're creating about yourself to almost duplicate yourself, not just for external but for internal. Tell me more about that. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. I look at AI and I look at these tools as an extension of the individual. I actually want to go back into what you said and replace the word, the twin or the clone or the duplicate, because no AI is ever going to be able to fully capture the essence of the individual. But when I reflect on the early days of my career, sitting in a basement as an auditor, going through dusty papers and looking at whether this number matches that number over there, even in that moment, I was asking myself the question of, do I really need to do this right this moment? I've just spent years getting a very complex education, and I don't know if this is the highest and best use of my skills. Now, if I was a Gen Z and that was today, those employees would have raised their hand and said, excuse me, isn't there a more efficient way of doing this? Why is it that we're still dusting off these papers? Alas, it wasn't culturally that appropriate to speak up. But imagine what we could have done and how much faster we would have accelerated our careers if we were given the calculator equivalents of the abacus. And I look at AI as the calculator equivalent in that domain. Soon it's not you versus the AI, it's you versus somebody else that is effectively using the AI tools. I have a designer on my team, really talented graphic designer, creative director. And a couple of months ago, she was telling me she wanted to do more work in the branding space. I was like, great, I'm supportive of your growth. Let's make it happen. But she was like, oh, I'm so busy with my day to day. I haven't had a chance to really think about that learning pathway and what I should be doing. My prompt to her was, listen, how much time are you spending learning all the Gen AI tools? She looked at me. She's like, well, I haven't really had a lot of time. My expectation is that you are spending at least 3 hours, if not 4 hours a week, learning these tools. You work in innovation. While you are on my payroll, I expect that you are upskilling because I want you to get to the point that 50% of the job that you're doing right now is augmented with these tools. And then guess what? That extra 50% of your time, we can use that for you to learn all of the branding things and to start pivoting your career in that direction. But I'm not going to backfill your role just for the sake of backfilling your role when I know that there are ways that you can gain these efficiencies. Fast forward, it's been maybe 2 months and she's made tremendous strides. And guess what? She has more free time to reinvest in the skills she wants to develop.
That's a great story, isn't it? And it's often about just helping people become more aware of that and then help them acknowledge what it's doing for them, and then they can run with it themselves. It's that sort of making it viral in a human sense in some ways, for them. And I'm sure there are many leaders who are tuning in, who and a lot of the messaging is resonating with them. Iliana, I would say, about, we've talked about the 20th century mentality coming to the 21st. We know that many leaders are still struggling with that shift and the transformation. So, from your own journey, what would be the 3 to 5 pieces of advice that you could give them to help them build momentum?
Step one, really get to know the employees that are on your teams. Get to know what drives them, what motivates them, what inspires them, and listen to them. Half of the time, they will tell you what they need from you. You just weren't attuned to listening, and I think that that's going to be a huge, huge step. The second is for leaders to not be afraid of the changes in the world and to spend time learning the tools, following the trends, and digging right in. And if you're not comfortable doing that on your own, raise your hand, ask for help. There's somebody in your network who's done it before. And you probably have employees on your teams that have been clamoring to learn some of these new things, and you can enlist their help in the process.
Yeah, some great points there about understanding. I like the word what you use there. What inspires your people, as long as what they, as well as what they need. That, and if you can help them as a leader doing that, then great. Be that enabler for them. Don't fear change yourself, and don't be afraid to ask for help, as you talked about. We talked about that reverse mentoring actually before. And spend time learning. I see from the research I do on leadership that the leadership learning curve for many is one of the steepest actually in business at the moment, and it takes some acknowledgement that from some leaders that I've talked to, where the help and the, involving other people into it can really help. Um, Such a lot of ground covered here, Liana, and sadly we have run out of time. And I'd like to thank you very much for joining me. I'm very sure those tuning in or watching on YouTube may want to find out more, connect. How do they do that? How do they get in touch?
So they can find me on LinkedIn, where I tend to post a lot about emerging tech trends. You can find me on Instagram, where I talk a lot more about the travels, and I'll be unveiling a lot more about the potted plant theory. And I'm working on a questionnaire so people can reach out and tell me where they think they fall on that potted plant spectrum. Are they a sequoia tree, a red maple, a potted plant, or or an air plant. And of course, you can find my personal website, and folks can reach out if they want help with their board of directors, getting them educated on where the world is going, or just general public speaking presentations, of which I tend to do a lot of.
And what is your personal website? Sorry, for those that aren't watching on YouTube.
It's Iliana OV, as in the short form for Oris Valiente.com.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, it's been great. Lots of food for thought for me as well. I'm immediately going to find out more about your potted plant theory, and I'm intrigued around where I'm going to end up on that. Thank you for joining me, Iliana.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. Please like, comment, and support us on your favourite platform, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch as well as listen to each episode.